We are here with Christy Smith, a candidate running for the 38th district race. Hi, Christy. Thank you for meeting us here today.
Hi, thanks for taking the time.
So let's jump right into it. You're a Democratic candidate going up against Dante Acosta. Glad you've made it this far, you know. Nice to see a woman in the field. We're from COC. You attended COC,
I did.
Correct?
Yes, proud Cougar.
Being that you went there, what does that college mean to you? What does it signify? And how do you see COC's role in the community?
Sure. COC is a tremendous asset for this community. You know, at some point in their career, 70% of students in this community attend COC for some reason. So in terms of its economic value in giving kids who want to have that university experience but maybe can't afford a full 4 years to get their start at the college, retrained adult individuals or kids right out of high school who want to come for a 2-year program that leads directly into a vocation. The college has been tremendously skilled at relating programs that they offer to jobs that are immediately available in the community. People who need to just want to come and pick up 1 or 2 courses to advance their own knowledge and just to learn and study for the fun of it. But you know, in terms of what the college meant to me, I was one of those kids who right out of high school was accepted to a number of 4-year universities, but because I lived in a single parent household, I didn't have the resources to do that. So the college not only provided me the opportunity to get the first 2 years of my general education done at a really low cost, but I was also proud to work there. So I worked in the EOPS program, I worked in the counseling office, and then by the time I left, I worked in the transfer center, and all great experiences. So the college really means a lot to me, and I want to see it continue to thrive and provide those opportunities for the next generation.
Looking into what you've done, it's obvious that you're well-rounded in the education field. I just wanted to know what your experience in the Newhall School Board has taught you about working with Republicans, because most of the members are from that party.
Sure.
So what has it taught you of working with them and their views versus your views, not only being Democratic but also representing the Democrats here in Santa Clarita?
Sure. Well, what I will say for all of the education leaders who I've met in this community, and that's every school board trustee, regardless of party, the bottom line for them is about doing what's best for kids and student achievement and really making our community schools something to be proud of. And we've been very successful about that. Every school district in this community is highly successful, very innovative, and that's why people move here. People move to the Santa Clarita Valley because of our public school system. So a lot of that is working across the aisle, but when you have a number of trustees who come to the table with that common goal, partisanship really falls away. And so that has been a positive experience for me. I have nothing but high praise for my board colleagues and the way that they address issues that come before us. And again, it really isn't about partisanship, it's about doing what's best for kids and their education.
You brought it upon yourself to run for this district because you saw that numerous of legislators with an experience in education their term was gonna be done, and there was nobody that you felt was gonna represent the education. So your entire campaign is based. Would it be okay if I say based on your background in education and your time on the school board? So being that said, what is it that you think the state is doing wrong for local school districts?
It's not so much what the state is doing wrong, but in the big picture, California used to be at the top of the public education game, and that was about 3 decades ago. And now we find ourselves at a time where we rank number 47 in the nation in terms of per pupil spending. Yet based on our population, we have a student population that has some of the most significant learning needs compared to any of the other states. So we need to be mindful of that, and as our economy continues to grow and we have more resources in the general fund, we need to dedicate more to education to get back to that nationally competitive funding level. And then by the same token, there are a number of other issues that interest me outside of education, which all drive that bigger focus about how we're growing our economy, how we're protecting our environment. So, education is my passion and what I'm really dedicated to, and what I think I bring to the table is one of my biggest strengths, but every area of public policy is interesting to me.
We used to be one of the top school districts, but now we're not. What are some things that you think the district is doing correct?
Well, we locally still have some of the top performing districts in Santa Clarita in this community, but at the state level, what we need to be doing better is sharing instructional practices that work. And so if I'm fortunate enough to be elected, one of the things I want to get to work on right away is an idea to do best practice academies for teachers and for administrative leaders to get together in different regions of California. And we know based on student performance data where schools are having successes and where schools are still facing some challenges. So let's pay those teachers a little extra stipend over the summer, get them together in teams and let them collaborate on some of those instructional practices that are working to help raise the level of achievement for everybody.
I recall you saying that you don't want to raise taxes when trying to increase funding for education.
Right.
But if I recall correctly, you are for Prop 55, which would raise state taxes. Can you give us a little more? Because I feel like that was a back and forth type of thing. So
Yeah, so Prop 55 is an extension of the taxes that occurred with Prop 30. And Prop 30 really was an important backstop to prevent continued budget bleeding for public schools in California. Had we continued on the path that we were without the revenue from Prop 30, local communities like ours would have continued to face teacher layoffs, significant teacher layoffs, which impacts the local economy, and cutbacks in student programs. So, you know, what we do as a disservice as Democrats is we say this is going to be a temporary tax, and then we go out and we ask the public to support it again, which is essentially what we're doing with Prop 55. It's not a new tax, it is an extension. Unfortunately, the way that we've set it up and phrased it, you know, does make it seem like there's a bit of a back and forth. But that is one revenue stream that I really support because it will keep teachers in the classroom and keep us advancing towards better student achievement.
So let's say you make it all the way to Sacramento. What would be the first bill that you take on once there?
I think it would be this idea of best practices and how do we share that information and make sure that we are equipping teachers with the best possible knowledge base for them to serve the students in California.
You did state that you don't see transparency in our local legislators now. So what are some ways that you would bring more transparency to the office?
Sure. Well, I do actually, I agree with the current Assemblyman Scott Wilk when he says we need more transparency in the state's budget process. It needs to be available to the public a little bit earlier so that there's a complete public review along with the legislators who do that very important work of vetting that budget. I would like to see legislation, you know, published and made available early in advance of legislators voting on it. So all of those measures that make the work that we do as legislators more readily available to the public and some time for turnaround and comment on that, I think is very appropriate.
There was at one point where you were part of the school district and you were voted out of the district because of a decision you tried to make,
so
or
that's right. That was the question that the Signal asked me at the Signal debate.
So
I, in my capacity on the Newhall School Board, also served all of the local school districts, so Saugus, Sulphur, Castaic, Newhall, the Hart District, and the college all participate in what's called the Santa Clarita Valley Trustees Association. Mm-hmm. And then that organization elects a board, and we all do joint work together on a number of things. So I had been serving as the legislative vice chair of that body, and my particular school district, which as you mentioned includes some Republicans as well, had taken a vote to go on a marketing campaign. Which some of our fellow neighboring school districts were opposed to, the manner in which it rolled out. So after that happened, we worked together with them to try to come to kind of a common agreement on what we would do with advertising and marketing going forward. And despite that, I feel like, you know, it's fair to say I wasn't voted out, but I wasn't put back in the position of legislative trustee. My board colleague, Sue Solomon, did take on that role, but it's also fair to say I wouldn't have had the time to do it right now anyway. But the other thing I will mention about that is that it's really important to understand that because of this concept of school choice for families and parents, we're going to continue to face this challenge as a state. When you have per pupil funding as the basis for a school district's budget, and those students actually have a lot more mobility and a lot more choices now in the school system and what's available between charters and public school, different public schools of choice. And I'm not talking about just this community, but statewide, this is now an issue. What that means for school district budgeting becomes really important, and we need to continue to have this conversation. But this concept of school choice has now driven school districts, traditional public school districts, into this new role of having to market themselves, which we haven't really done before historically. So it's a new paradigm in education, and it's something that we need to continue to track and follow and make sure that at the end of the day, like I started my interview with you, it's really about student achievement. And are we driving student achievement, and are we being fair to school districts as they try to budget these critical resources with very mobile student populations?
You consider yourself a moderate Democrat.
Right.
How will you represent the Democratic people when you consider yourself a moderate Democrat, but still representing that party?
Yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, I will have a much greater challenge to govern than my opponent will. My opponent would have the freedom to go and be a no vote on anything he doesn't agree with. I'm really going to have to study in depth every bill that comes in front of me and make the decision that I think A, is best for my constituency, and B, makes the most fiscal and financial sense, and C, which is also really important, it doesn't have any long-term unintended consequences, which a lot of time legislation does. So I will really have to have a much bigger challenge, a higher hurdle in terms of governance, but I will also say there's a growing and sizable caucus of moderate Democrats already in the state assembly who are sort of that middle block that aren't always necessarily in lockstep with what the more left side of the Democratic Party goes for. They kind of take this middle road approach, particularly when it comes to fiscal issues.
So we discussed a little bit about Prop 55, and there's also Prop 51, which is the California Public Schools Facility Bonds Initiative. And if it's passed, $9 billion in bonds to fund improvement and construction of schools from K through 12 and community colleges will happen. Is this something you are for?
I am for this because every local school district here in the 38th that has gone out with a bond measure itself in the last decade will benefit from this through matching funds. So that includes the Hart District, the Saugus District, the Castaic District, the Newhall District, the Simi Valley Schools District, which now currently has a bond measure on their ballot. So there will be added and very necessary resources for facilities, and particularly for tech infrastructure upgrades, which is something that every local district has undertaken recently. You know, Hart went way above and beyond with upgrading science facilities. We did that in Newhall as well. Saugus is taking that same approach and adding tech and adding science facilities and new classroom buildings. And, you know, we experience so much growth here in our student population in Santa Clarita that a lot of our campuses had those, you know, portable buildings that have been there far beyond their sort of useful life, and they're really beginning to deteriorate in a way that requires us to replace them now. And another important thing to remember about investment in the local public schools, particularly in the school infrastructure, is that it keeps our property values high in communities, particularly in communities where people do move because of the student achievement associated with the school districts. It's also about, you know, schools that look nice, are well kept, and have great facilities for kids. Those drive property values for everybody.
Prop 64, which is legalizing marijuana, you answered, I have significant concerns about legalization at this time. I am paused on this issue. I feel like that wasn't a direct answer versus your opponent who gave a direct answer. What is your position now on this proposition, and why were you hesitant to give a position then?
It's not that I was hesitant. I know that there are a lot of people who support the use of marijuana for people who are of age. What I am worried about in this proposition is that it doesn't have sufficient regulatory infrastructure to protect the public in the way that I think the public should be protected, and particularly youth and minors from consumable products. And you know, it's not one of the issues that I feel very strongly about one way or the other. And so my position is I'm not overwhelmingly opposed, but I don't think that this initiative has the strength of regulatory efficiency that we want.
Going back to the previous debate you had, it was a bit heated, but do you feel that your performance was able to show who you truly are as a candidate, or do you feel like that some people might have just seen it as like a heated debate and two candidates that have a lot to say?
Yeah, you know what I will say about the modern framework of those kind of debates? It's really difficult to have in-depth policy issues when you're only allowed a 2-minute answer. Most of the challenges that we face as a state and the policy that goes along with solving those challenges are much longer answers than 2 minutes, right? And you end up getting down in the weeds and you get down in the mud and you try to point out what you think are the most salient points, and at the same time pointing out some contradictions that your opponent has made. So I think we need to think about that as a public, and that's one of the reasons why I am so supportive of getting money out of politics. because I think we need to be having real policy discussions. And when you get a lot of money into the process, really what it drives is sort of that quick soundbite, gotcha type campaigning. I'm a candidate who would be perfectly happy to, I'd take a written test. I would sit and talk policy with people for a couple of hours and try to really convey my depth of knowledge in a number of fields, as opposed to sort of those quick soundbite. We do it because it's part of the process, but I hope that I'm able to convey in these kind of conversations, a little bit more depth.
In that debate, you also stated that Dante Acosta was a Donald Trump supporter. How is it that you came about this information?
Yeah, so his campaign literature that he sent out during the primary had a lot of common euphemisms that have been used by the extreme right lately, like not politically correct. And not politically correct is a loaded concept for a lot of people. I mean, does that mean that it gives you the right to make racist comments? Does that mean that you don't hold back and you don't show discretion when you're having these important policy disputes? So to me, things like not politically correct and talking about border security in a way that I think a lot of voters are really beyond now. I think a lot of voters understand that we're at a place where we really need to be talking about pathways to citizenship and securing our borders in a non-hostile way, and frankly revamping our immigration process. Our immigration process is very unfriendly to people and very costly, and we need to think about that as a country. If we value our nation's diversity, and particularly our state's diversity, we need to think about what that process should look like and how accommodating it is, and streamline the bureaucracy. At the same time, being mindful of security. Of course, we should always be mindful of security and vetting individuals who want to become citizens here, but it needs work. It needs a lot of work. So what was concerning to me that my opponent was using what I would consider sort of dog whistles to the more extreme elements of that party, and then at the same time not denouncing a candidate who I frankly find morally reprehensible on a number of levels.
Any other last comments that you would touch up on, or anything else that you would recommend any viewers know about you, or either your campaign or where you want to take this and where you're willing to take this? Any last comments you have?
Yeah, I pride myself on my 6 years of work in the Newhall School District as being an honest, transparent, available public servant, and that will continue if I'm elected to this position. So one of the things I'm really committed and dedicated to is bringing people in from all over the district to have conversations about what our local needs are and what I need to take with me to Sacramento to get that work done here for the community. How do we continue to provide economic growth and opportunity, educational opportunity, a safe, secure, environmentally sound community? So all of those things are important to me, and I would invite people to just be in touch anytime if they have concerns, if they have questions, and I would encourage people, now more than ever, get out and vote. I know that the top of the ticket race really is, kind of concerning a lot of people, but all of these down ballot races are what really matter. That's what really drives what happens to all of us in our everyday lives. So take the time to be informed and turn out and vote.
Well, thank you so much, Christy, for being here with us today. And it was lovely meeting you and getting to know your side of the story.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And more election news to be revealed in our very own live election show on November 8th from 9 p.m. to midnight. You can watch it at CougarNews.com. For Cougar News, I'm Briselda Holguin.